I don't remember when I stopped hating him. Maybe I never did. Maybe hate was just the easiest word for something I didn't have a language to name yet. The gym was almost empty. It always was by the time I finished. Most of the team cleared out within 20 minutes of the final whistle. Showers, jokes, planned for the night spilling out into the parking lot like steam. But I stayed. I always stayed. There was something about the silence after practice that felt necessary, like I needed to prove to myself that I could still move when no one was watching, that my body wasn't just performing for the scoreboard or the coach's clipboard, that I could still find the rhythm when it was just me and the sound of my own breath. I ran the same drill I'd been running for weeks. Drive left, pivot, pull up for the jumper. Over and over. My legs burned. My shoulders ached in that deep, faithful way that meant I'd pushed hard enough to feel it tomorrow. Sweat pooled at the base of my spine, slid down the side of my jaw. I didn't wipe it away. I just kept moving. I missed a shot. The ball clanged off the rim, loud and ugly in the empty space. I cursed under my breath, more at myself than the miss. My hands were shaking, not from exhaustion, from something else, something I've been outrunning for months. That's when I heard his voice. You play like someone who's trying to forget something. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I knew his voice the way you know the sound of your own heartbeat when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning. Low, steady, with that edge of amusement that always made me feel like he could see straight through me. Jonah. He was still here. Of course he was. He always was. I grabbed the ball off the floor and straightened, forcing myself to meet his eyes across the court. He was leaning against the bleachers, arms crossed, still in his practice gear. His hair was damp, pushed back off his forehead. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that makes you want to leave. The kind that roots you in place. I didn't answer him right away. I just stared, letting the silence stretch until it felt like a challenge. Finally, I said, "You talk like someone who wants to be part of it." It came out sharper than I meant, but that was how it always was with us. Every sentence a jab, every look a test. He pushed off the bleachers and walked toward me, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. "Maybe I do," he said. And then he smiled, not the cocky grin he wore during games, but something quieter, something that made my chest tighten. I turned away, dribbling the ball once, twice, just to have something to do with my hands. The sound echoed through the gym, bouncing off the walls and the high ceiling. It should have felt normal, familiar, but it didn't, because he was still standing there, still watching me with that look that made me feel like I was the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. I don't know when it started. The thing between us. The weight that lived in the space where our eyes met and our shoulders collided during scrimmages. The tension that hung beneath every argument, every shove, every moment we pretended we were just rivals. We were rivals. Officially. On paper. In the eyes of the team, the coach, everyone who watched us go at each other like two wolves fighting over the same territory. We pushed each other harder than anyone else could. We made each other better. That's what everyone said. That's what I told myself. But somewhere along the way, the line blurred. The anger started to feel like something else. The competition started to feel like conversation. And the hatred, if that's what it ever really was, started to feel like the only way I knew how to stay close to him without admitting I wanted to. I hated that he could match me. I hated that he never backed down. I hated that he saw through every wall I put up and still showed up, night after night, waiting for me to crack. But more than that, I hated that I wanted him to stay. The air between us changed that night. I felt it the moment he spoke. The moment I answered. The moment we stopped pretending we were just two players running drills in an empty gym. He took another step closer. I could hear his breathing now, steady and deep, like he just finished running but was refusing to show it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the court. The smell of sweat and rubber and old wood filled the space. Everything felt too bright and too quiet at the same time. I should have left. I should have grabbed my bag, made some excuse, walked out into the night where the air was cooler and the world made sense again. But I didn't. I just stood there, holding the ball against my hip, feeling the weight of his gaze like a hand pressed against my chest. And just like that, the air between us changed. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't a moment I could point to later and say, that's when it started. It was quieter than that, more inevitable. like the way night falls, not all at once, but in degrees, until you look up and realize the light is gone and you're standing in something you can't take back. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I wanted it to happen or if I was terrified it would. All I knew was that Jonah was still standing there, still looking at me like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than either of us could admit. And I knew, in the part of myself I'd been trying to silence for months, that I wasn't going to walk away. Not tonight. Not anymore. I grew up learning that control was currency. That if you could discipline your body, your time, your focus, you could build something that no one could take from you. My father taught me that. Not with words, but with silence. With the way he looked at me when I brought home anything less than perfect. With the space he left in every room that I learned to fill with achievement. Basketball became my language. The only one that felt honest. The only place where effort translated directly into result. Where the scoreboard didn't lie and the clock didn't care about your excuses. I was good. I made myself good. I ran until my lungs burned. I shot until my arms went numb. I studied film like it was scripture. By the time I was 22, the game wasn't just what I did. It was who I was. I didn't have friends, not really. I had teammates. I had people who respected my work ethic and stayed out of my way. I liked it that way. Isolation felt safer than connection. Ambition felt cleaner than attachment. I told myself I didn't need anything else. And then Jonah transferred in. He was 23, a year older, but he carried himself like someone who'd already lived 3 lifetimes. Confident in a way that felt effortless, like he'd never had to earn his place in a room, because rooms just made space for him. He was talented, disgustingly talented, the kind of player who made everything look easy, who could read the court like he'd written the play himself. He smiled during games. He laughed during practice. He moved like basketball was supposed to be fun. I hated him immediately. Not because he wasn't good, because he was. Because he could match me shot for shot, drive for drive, and still have energy left over to talk trash while doing it. Because when I pushed, he pushed back harder. Because he was the first person in years who looked at my discipline and didn't flinch. Who looked at my intensity and met it with his own. Our rivalry became the backbone of the team within weeks. Every practice turned into a war. Every scrimmage felt personal. The coach loved it. He'd pit us against each other deliberately, knowing we'd both play like our lives depended on it. The other guys started placing bets on who'd score more in drills. They joked about it, called us fire and ice, said we made each other better. They weren't wrong. But what they didn't see was the way Jonah looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way his jaw tightened when I walked past him without speaking. The way he stayed late on the same nights I did, even when his body was screaming for rest. The way our arguments never quite resolved, just suspended in mid-air like something waiting to combust. Off the court, we circled each other. We didn't hang out. We didn't talk beyond the necessary. But we were always aware of where the other one was. In the weight room, in the film sessions, in the training facility. Like 2 magnets that couldn't decide whether to snap together or repel. He threw me off balance. That's what I hated most. I'd spent years building a routine, a rhythm, a system that worked. And Jonah disrupted all of it just by existing. He made me play angrier. He made me stay later. He made me think about something other than the next drill, the next game, the next goal. He made me feel something I didn't have a name for. I told myself it was competition, that I just want to beat him, that every time our shoulders collided during a defensive drill, every time our eyes locked across the court, every time his voice cut through the noise of practice, to find me specifically, it was just rivalry. Just 2 athletes pushing each other to be better. But late at night, alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling with my heart still racing from practice hours earlier, I knew it was something else. I knew it in the way my pulse quickened when I heard his laugh in the locker room, in the way I memorized the cadence of his footsteps, in the way I replayed our arguments like they were conversations I didn't want to end, in the way I caught myself looking for him in every room, on every court, in every moment when I should have been focused on anything else. Jonah was volatile where I was controlled, expressive where I was restrained. He wore his emotions on his face, in his body, in every movement. And somehow, impossibly, he was the only person who ever made me want to do the same. Under every glare, every shove, every muttered insult, something else burned. Something I've been taught to ignore my entire life. Something that felt dangerous and inevitable and impossibly real. I didn't know what to call it yet, but Jonah did, and that terrified me more than anything. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday practices always ran long, and by the time the coach finally blew the whistle, most of the team was already mentally checked out. They showered fast, made plans for dinner, disappeared into the parking lot with music bleeding from car speakers and laughter echoing off the pavement. I stayed behind. Same as always. The gym felt different when it was empty. Bigger. The sound sharper. Every dribble, every squeak of rubber on hardwood, every breath magnified in the silence. I liked it that way. Needed it. The quiet let me think. Let me work through the mistakes from practice, the possessions where I'd hesitated, the shots I should have made. I ran my drills methodically. Footwork first, then shooting, then conditioning. My legs were already heavy, my shoulders tight, but I pushed through. I always pushed through. That's what separated good players from great ones. The willingness to keep going when your body begged you to stop. I was 40 minutes in when I heard the door open. I didn't look up. I figured it was the janitor coming to mop the floors or turn off the lights. I kept shooting, focused on my release, my follow-through, the arc of the ball as it left my fingertips. Then I heard his voice. "You don't know how to stop, do you?" My hands froze mid-motion. I turned, and there he was. Jonah, still in his practice gear, a towel draped around his neck, hair damp and pushed back from his face. He was standing near the baseline, hands in the pockets of his shorts, watching me with that expression I could never quite read. Amusement, maybe, or something deeper. I grabbed the hem of my shirt and wiped the sweat from my face, buying myself a second to steady my voice. "You following me now?" He laughed, soft and low, and walked toward the equipment rack. He grabbed a ball, spun it once in his hands. "Just making sure you don't collapse out here. You'd hate for me to save your life." I turned back to the basket, ignoring the way my pulse kicked up. "I'm fine." He dribbled once, twice, the sound cutting through the space between us. "I know you are. That's not why I came back." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. Or maybe I did, and that's what scared me. He moved onto the court, casual, like he belonged there. Like we did this all the time. One-on-one. I looked at him, at the way his jaw was set, at the challenge in his eyes. I should have said no. Should have told him I was done for the night, that I needed to stretch, to ice my knee, to do literally anything other than stay in this gym with him. Instead, I said, fine. We didn't keep score. We never did when it was just us. It wasn't about winning. It was about movement, about testing each other, about the way our bodies learn to anticipate and react. He drove left, I cut him off. I pulled up for a jumper. He contested. Every possession felt like a conversation we were too afraid to have with words. He played differently when no one else was watching. Looser, less performative, but no less intense. Every time our shoulders collided, every time his hand grazed my wrist on a block, every time we ended up too close, breathing hard, eyes locked, I felt something shift. The ball rolled away after a contested layup. It bounced toward the sideline, slow and aimless. Neither of us went after it. Jonah just stood there, chest rising and falling, sweat tracing a line down his temple. His eyes didn't leave mine. "You ever get tired of fighting me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. My throat felt tight. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't tell anymore if it was from the game or from the way he was looking at me. "No," I said. The word came out rougher than I intended. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual grin. It was something slower, something that made my stomach twist. Good. Me neither. But neither of us moved away. The gym felt impossibly quiet. The lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. Outside, a car engine started and faded into the distance. The world kept turning, but in that moment, it felt like we were the only two people left in it. I should have walked away. Should have grabbed my bag, muttered something about being tired, broken whatever this was before it became something I couldn't take back. But I didn't. I just stood there, 3 feet away from him, feeling the weight, of every unsaid thing pressing down on the space between us. Jonah took a breath, and I watched his shoulders drop slightly, like he was letting go of something he'd been holding too long. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. I'm not imagining this. Am I? I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because if I said no, everything would change. And if I said yes, I'd be lying. So I just looked at him. Let the silence be my answer. And that's when I realized we'd both already crossed a line we couldn't see. What happened next wasn't planned. It couldn't have been. There was no script for this, no playbook, no strategy one could have rehearsed in my head until it felt safe. It was just tension breaking after months of buildup. Years, maybe. However long, I'd been telling myself that what I felt when I looked at him was anything other than want. Jonah stepped forward. Not much. Just enough that the distance between us went from safe to dangerous. Just enough that I could see the way his chest moved with each breath, the way his hands flexed at his sides like he was fighting the urge to reach out. I didn't step back. That was my choice. The only one that mattered. I could have moved, could have laughed it off, made some joke, grabbed the ball, and started shooting again. Could have pretended I didn't understand what was happening. But I stayed exactly where I was. His eyes searched mine, looking for permission or hesitation or some sign that I was about to run. I gave him nothing, just held his gaze and felt my pulse hammering in my throat. You think anyone else pushes me like you do? His voice was low, almost rough, different from the way he usually spoke. There was no performance in it, no bravado, just honesty, raw and unguarded. That's not what this is, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie. Knew he knew it too. Then what is it? I didn't have an answer. Or I did, but saying it out loud felt like jumping off something high without knowing if there was water below. So I just stood there, breathing hard, feeling the heat radiating off his body, feeling the weight of everything we'd never said pressing down on us both. And then I exhaled. Just let the breath go, let my shoulders drop, let the armor I'd been wearing for months finally crack. That's when Jonah moved. He closed the last inch between us, and suddenly his hand was on my jaw, rough and certain, and his mouth was on mine. The kiss was fast, rough, startled, like neither of us had meant for it to happen, but both of us had known it would. His lips were warm, slightly chapped, tasting like salt and exertion. His grip on my face was firm, almost desperate, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. I didn't disappear. I kissed him back. My hands found his shirt, fisted in the fabric, pulling him closer even though there was no more space left to close. Everything I'd been holding back, everything I'd been running from, poured into that moment. The anger, the frustration, the longing I'd been too afraid to name. It all translated into the press of his mouth against mine, into the way our bodies collided like we were still on the court, still competing, still trying to prove something neither of us could articulate. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. Time felt strange, compressed, and infinite at once. When we broke apart, we both stepped back at the same time, like we'd choreographed it. Like our bodies still remembered how to mirror each other, even when our minds were spinning. I couldn't look at him. Not yet. I stared at the floor, at the scuff marks and the lines painted on the hardwood, trying to catch my breath. My lips felt swollen. My heart was racing faster than it ever did during games. My hands were shaking. The gym felt too big suddenly, too empty. The lights too bright, the silence too loud. Every sound magnified. The hum of the ventilation system. The distant drip of a faucet in the locker room. My own pulse pounding in my ears. Jonah said my name. Quiet. Careful. I shook my head. Not an answer to anything. Just in denial of the whole moment. Of what we'd just done. Of what it meant. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Vulnerable. Uncertain. Like he'd just shown me something he couldn't take back and was waiting to see if I'd use it against him. I should have said something. Should have told him it was a mistake, or that we needed to forget it happened, or that we couldn't do this again. Should have rebuilt the walls, put the armor back on, returned to the version of myself that made sense. But I couldn't, because standing there, looking at him, feeling the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to forget. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to pretend anymore. The night felt too quiet as we stood there, neither of us moving, neither of us speaking. Just two players in an empty gym, staring at each other across a line we'd finally crossed. And when Jonah finally picked up his bag and walked toward the door, he didn't say goodbye. He just looked back once, his hand on the doorframe, his eyes asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the echo of what we'd done and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. We didn't talk about it the next day, or the day after that. Practice continued like nothing had happened. The coach ran the same drills. The team fell into the same rhythms. On the surface, everything looked normal. But underneath, in the space between Jonah and me, everything had shifted. I felt it the moment I walked into the gym that first morning. He was already there, stretching near the baseline, and when our eyes met across the court, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement. The kind of look that said we both knew what we'd done, and we both knew we were going to pretend we had it. So that's what we did. We pretended, but the game between us changed. Our movements got sharper, more aggressive. Every defensive possession felt personal. Every time we matched up, there was an edge that hadn't been there before. The coach noticed, called us out for playing too physical, for letting emotion override strategy. The team noticed too. They stopped making jokes, started giving us space. I told myself it was fine, that we'd just go back to how things were. That the kiss had been a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment, something we could file away and forget. But my body wouldn't let me forget. Every time Jonah brushed past me in the paint, I felt it. Every time his voice cut through the noise of practice to call out a play, I heard it differently. Every time we ended up too close during a drill, my pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. My focus fractured. I missed shots I should have made. Lost my man on defense. Made stupid turnovers. The coach pulled me aside after practice one day, asked me if something was wrong, if I was injured, if I needed rest. I told him I was fine. He didn't believe me. I wasn't fine. Jonah started showing up early, before anyone else, before the coaches. I'd walk into the gym at 6 in the morning, thinking I'd have the court to myself, and he'd already be there, running suicides, shooting free throws, not saying a word when I arrived, just acknowledging me with a nod and continuing whatever he was doing. I started staying later, long after everyone else had gone home, pushing myself through drills until my legs gave out, until my hands couldn't grip the ball anymore, until I was too exhausted to think about anything except sleep. But even then, lying in bed in the dark, I thought about him. We didn't touch again, didn't even come close. But the air between us hummed with what we were both pretending to ignore. Every glance felt weighted. Every accidental brush of shoulders in the hallway felt deliberate. The silence between us grew louder than any conversation we'd ever had. A week passed like that. 7 days of avoidance disguised as routine. 7 days of playing at being rivals when we both knew we'd become something else entirely. It was after practice on a Thursday when everything broke open again. The gym had cleared out. I was gathering my things, moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to think about whether Jonah had already left or if he was still somewhere in the building. Trying not to care. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew it was him. Could tell by the rhythm of his walk, by the way the air shifted when he entered a room. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there close enough that I could feel his presence, far enough that we weren't touching. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Tired. You can pretend it didn't happen. I can't. I stopped moving. My hand frozen on the zipper of my bag. My heart suddenly too loud in my chest. I didn't turn around. Didn't trust myself to look at him. You think this won't mess everything up? I said. My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just resignation. It already has. I felt something crack inside me. Some last defense I'd been holding on to. Because he was right. Everything was already different. The kiss hadn't ruined things. It had just revealed what had been there all along. What I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. I finally turned to face him. He looked exhausted. Not from practice. From carrying this. From being the only one willing to name it while I hid behind denial and discipline and all the other tools I'd used my whole life to avoid feeling things I couldn't control. His eyes met mine, and I saw everything there. The frustration, the want, the question he'd been asking since that night in the gym. What do we do now? I didn't have an answer. Didn't know if there was a good one. Didn't know if we could go back or if going forward would destroy everything we'd built. But standing there, looking at him, feeling the weight of all the things we hadn't said pressing down on both of us, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep pretending. Not anymore. The final game of the season fell on a Saturday in late March. The gym was packed. Standing room only. The energy was electric, the kind that makes your skin prickle, that makes every sound sharper and every movement feel significant. We won. Decisively. The kind of win that felt earned, that came from months of work and sacrifice and pushing each other past our limits. When the final buzzer sounded, the crowd erupted. Our teammates rushed the court, shouting, embracing, riding the high of victory. The coach was beaming. Someone dumped a cooler of water over his head. Camera flashes went off. Parents cheered from the stands. But I couldn't feel any of it. I stood near center court, breathing hard, sweat dripping down my spine, and all I could think about was Jonah. My eyes kept finding his across the chaos. Through the celebration, through the noise, through the years of competition and the weeks of silence, and a moment that had ruined any chance of pretending. He was watching me too. Our teammates slapped our backs, pulled us into huddles, shouted things I didn't hear. I went through the motions, shook hands, smiled when I was supposed to, said the right things to the coach, to the reporters who wanted quotes, to the families who'd come to watch. But none of it felt real. It all felt like something happening to someone else while I stood outside myself, watching, waiting for the moment when I could stop performing. The gym emptied slowly. The crowd filtered out. The team showered, changed, made plans to celebrate at someone's house. I told them I'd meet them later, knowing I wouldn't. They didn't push. They'd stopped asking questions weeks ago. I sat on the bench in the locker room, still in my uniform, staring at nothing. The building had gone quiet. Just the hum of the lights and the distant sound of doors closing and the echo of my own thoughts. I didn't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my body to cool down, for my muscles to start stiffening, for the adrenaline to drain away and leave me hollow. Then I heard the locker room door open. I didn't look up. I knew who it was. Jonah's footsteps were soft against the tile floor. He stopped a few feet away, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. When I finally raised my head, he was standing there in his street clothes, hands in his pockets, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Tired, maybe, or resigned, or something else entirely. "You're still fighting," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, an acknowledgement of the war I'd been waging with myself since the night we kissed. The battle between what I'd been taught I should want and what I actually wanted. Between control and surrender. Between safety and truth. I shook my head. Not anymore. The words came out before I decided to say them. But once they were out, hanging in the air between us, I realized they were true. I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of running. Tired of treating what I felt for him like something shameful, something to be managed and contained and hidden away. Jonah took a step closer, then another, until he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "And stop talking," he said. His voice was steady. Sure, like he'd been waiting for this moment, for me to finally catch up to where he'd been all along. And I did. I stopped talking. I stood up, closed the distance between us, and kissed him. This time it wasn't rough or startled or desperate. It was deliberate. A choice I was making with clear eyes and a clear mind. A choice that felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. His hands came up to frame my face, gentle this time, and he kissed me back like he'd been holding his breath for weeks and could finally exhale. Like this was the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense the moment we'd admitted what we were to each other. There were no witnesses this time. No empty gym, no fluorescent lights, no basketball rolling away forgotten. Just the two of us in a quiet locker room, finally letting go of all the reasons we'd given ourselves to stay apart. When we pulled back, neither of us moved away. We just stood there, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, letting the weight of what we'd been denying finally settle into something real. Jonah's thumb traced along my jaw. "You're sure?" I nodded, more sure than I'd been about anything in a long time, because I'd spent my whole life chasing certainty through control, through discipline, through achievement. But this standing here with him, choosing us, felt like a different kind of certainty. The kind you can't earn or plan for. The kind you just have to trust. Months later, the season was over. The trophies sat in the display case near the main entrance, polished and permanent. Our team photo hung on the wall of champions, frozen in that moment of victory, all of us smiling like we'd conquered something that mattered. Life had moved on. At least, that's what it looked like on paper. Most of the team had scattered. Some graduated. Some transferred. Some just stopped showing up once there were no more games to play, no more reasons to push their bodies past comfort, no more glory to chase. But I still came to the gym. Not every day anymore. Not with the same desperation I'd had during the season, but regularly enough that it felt like routine. Like home. I'd shoot around, run through drills that had become muscle memory, work on the parts of my game that still needed refining even though there was no coach watching, no scout in the stands, no next game circled on a calendar. Jonah still found excuses to join me. He'd show up without warning, walking through those double doors like he belonged there, like he'd never stopped belonging there. Sometimes he'd bring coffee. Sometimes he'd just show up in his gym clothes, ready to play. We didn't plan it, didn't text beforehand, or coordinate schedules. He just knew when I'd be there. Or maybe he just kept showing up until I was. We'd play one-on-one sometimes. Other times we'd just shoot around, passing the ball back and forth in comfortable silence. The competition was still there. We still pushed each other, still talked trash, still played like every possession mattered. But it felt different now. Lighter. Like we'd finally figured out that we didn't have to prove anything anymore. One evening in late summer, when the heat hung thick in the air and the gym felt like a sauna, Jonah tossed me the ball from half court. I caught it, felt the familiar weight in my hands, the texture of the leather against my palms. "You still hate me." I looked over at him. He was smiling, that same half smirk he'd worn the first time we'd met, the one that used to make my blood pressure spike. But now it just made something warm settle in my chest. "Depend on the day," I said. He laughed. "Good. I'd hate to lose the competition." I dribbled once, then passed it back to him. The competition was still there. Would always be there, probably. That part of us hadn't changed. We still wanted to be better, to push harder, to prove something to ourselves and each other. But now it existed alongside something else. Something that felt less like fighting and more like partnership. We walked off the court together as the sun started setting outside, casting long shadows through the high windows. Our shoulders brushed, fell into the same rhythm, the same pace we'd learned over months of circling each other, pushing against each other, finally moving toward each other. The building was quiet, empty, just like it had been that night when everything changed. But this silence felt different, less heavy, less charged with things we couldn't say. Jonah grabbed his bag from the bench, slung it over his shoulder. "You want to get food?" I nodded. Yeah, it was simple, easy, the kind of question that would have felt impossible months ago, weighted with meaning and consequence. Now, it was just two people making plans. Two people who'd figured out how to exist in the same space without combusting. We walked out into the parking lot together. The air was cooler outside, the sky streaked with orange and purple. Summer was ending. A new season would start soon. Not basketball season, just life. Whatever came next. I didn't know what that looked like yet. Didn't know if we'd still be doing this in a year, or 5 years, or 10. Didn't know if what we had would survive outside the context of the gym, away from a court where we'd learned each other's rhythms and tells and weaknesses. But standing there in the fading light, watching Jonah unlock his car and toss his bag in the back seat, I realized I wasn't afraid of not knowing anymore. Because it wasn't about winning. It wasn't about having all the answers or controlling every variable or building something perfect that no one could take from me. It was about showing up, about staying, about choosing someone even when it was complicated, even when it didn't fit into the plan I'd built for my life. even when it meant letting go of control and trusting that something uncertain could be worth it. Jonah looked over at me from across the parking lot. You coming? I smiled. Yeah, I'm coming. We got in our separate cars, drove out of the parking lot one behind the other, headlights cutting through the dusk. And somewhere between the gym and wherever we were going next, I realized this was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not victory, not perfection, not even basketball, just this, just him, just us. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.